I really want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank the executive committee, Michael Griffin, and all of you who have encouraged us to have this conversation. If we didn't have the pandemic, we'd all be meeting in pubs like they did in colonial times, talking about the present moment. And what I want this to be is more of a discussion about feelings, not so much facts and figures. I can send you during the discussion, if anybody needs facts and figures, I'll be happy to send them out to all of you after this. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to just have a discussion. And I'm going to tell you where I am at this moment. George Floyd was killed 30 days ago on May 25th. Think of that, 30 days ago. And think about what has happened to the world in 30 days. And the day before George Floyd was killed, Christian Cooper, who was a Black Harvard-educated bird watcher, was walking in Central Park. You've seen the videos. A white woman, someone I would know, works at an investment firm, probably a liberal, probably knows how to order wine, probably has Black friends, someone we would consider to be a cosmopolitan, weaponized her whiteness to call the police on Mr. Christian Cooper. I mean, it was perfect. She said, I'm going to tell them an African-American man. She got on the phone and she went right into a trope of the white woman being harassed by this dangerous Black man. Every Black person understood historically what was happening, and every Black person that I know who saw the officer with his knee on George Floyd knew what was happening. It was a lynching. It takes 8 minutes to die on the gallows. It took about 6 minutes for this gentleman to die. And not only did all the Black people realize it was a lynching, that 17-year-old girl, Darnella Jackson, who filmed it on her phone, knew what she was doing. The policeman threatened her and told her, get back, get back. She did not. She stayed on it the entire time because in her DNA, she knew what she was witnessing. Now, how do I feel? I feel the most optimistic I've ever felt in my many years, and I'm also Peter's era, about race relations in this country. And I feel it for two reasons. Number one, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And a pandemic is an interesting thing. It's invisible. It's always there. You know, I don't know, should I touch this? Should I go here? I know what I can't do. I know what should I do? I'm always worried because I'm of that age. I'm always worried that I may do the wrong thing, which will have lethal consequences for me. That's where all of America, everyone in this country is feeling that. That's the way I feel every day as a Black man. Systemic racism is always there, always invisible. You don't know if you're doing the right thing or not doing the right thing. There was an article this morning in the Inquirer which says, we're going from a pandemic to an endemic. An endemic means that it's always going to be around. The common cold is an endemic. And I thought to myself, my goodness, that's systemic racism. It's always around. So we were a country that is vulnerable. We're all emotionally vulnerable about this invisible killer. We also are not in the office. So everyone had the time to watch a man die. And no matter where you are on the political spectrum, when you watch a man die, your humanity comes forward. And so everyone who watched it was horrified at what they saw. And I look upon this pandemic as the tide going out into the sea. And when the tide went out, a metaphor is what we saw was the hull of a slave ship. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about race and why it's so difficult in this country is we have to talk about slavery. We've been enslaved 250 years. We've been free 150 years. 100 years of those have been, systemic racism, Jim Crow, segregation. The last 50 years, we've made a lot of progress on a lot of levels, but still in every bottom, in the bottom of every metric of social well-being, education, health, wealth creation, house ownership, we're still at the bottom of every metric there, even though we've made great progress. So why am I optimistic? I'm optimistic because I could not believe all the white people protesting. And I'm here at home, so I'm glued to the TV. Trust me, I would like to be out there, but I've been through 5 moments and I feel like I have the right to sit back and watch this on TV. I have been shocked at the number of white people of all ages, sizes, education levels who have been protesting about Black Lives Matter, signs that say Black Lives Matter. Every demonstration I was in, Black people were always 80%, and we had Jewish folks and a few Jesuits. And if we had white Protestants, we had the ministers and not so much the congregants. But to see this wave of primarily young people, because they're idealistic and they have the time, but to see this wave coming forward. And then I realized that for the first time, and I do a lot of thinking about this, for the first time in my life, when I saw the crowd of people out there, I said, this isn't about equal opportunity, although my terminology is we want equal opportunity. I grew up, equal opportunity, that's really what we want. What I'm witnessing is something that's more profound, and that is the dismantling of the racial state. I'd never thought about our country, and I should have, as a racial state. We talk about racism and we have systemic racism and white privilege, but when seeing all those white folks saying, take down that statue, change this, change that, make our country work, then I realized this is the dismantling of the racial state, which is amazing that I would even see it. Trust me, I know it's a multi-generational project, but trust me. Second thing is, and then I'm going to close out with a personal story. You know, Washington, D.C., I'm from a Washington family, was a cosmopolitan town, but when I was growing up, restaurants were segregated. Good restaurants. I mean, we didn't have credit cards, but which had more than 2 types of wine, good restaurants. And we didn't know which ones we could go to, which ones we couldn't. It's like having a pandemic. Well, you call up and say, well, I want to go out to dinner. What restaurant? Oh, go to this one. They'll take us. So okay, it's okay. I don't have to put on gloves. I can now go to this restaurant. And then John F. Kennedy came in, and all of a sudden, African nations began to get free, and there were Black ambassadors in Washington. And the first country was Ghana. Sorry, Michael. I know Namibia is in there further down the line, but the first country was Ghana. And within 2 weeks of arriving, the Ghanaian ambassador and some colleagues showed up at a very elegant restaurant in Georgetown. They made a reservation, and the guy has a name like Kwa Amo, I don't know why the person that took the reservation didn't realize this is not a WASPy name or a Japanese name. But when the ambassador showed up, the lady said, "Sir, I'm sorry, we can't serve you." And so the ambassador, who's educated at Oxford, has a QC, Queen's Counsel, looks around and he sees empty seats and says, "Well, we made a reservation. You have empty seats." And the lady said, "Sir, we don't serve colored people here." So the ambassador and his team withdrew. The next day in the Washington Post, on the front page, was an article, "Restaurant Refuses Ambassador." Didn't say black, didn't say African. Restaurant refuses ambassador. This opens the door for all the embassies in Washington, all the European embassies, the Japanese, even the South African embassy. And you know what it was like in South Africa. Even the South African ambassador signed a letter to the Secretary of State, which was released 2 days later, protesting segregation of their colleague. And this set off a firestorm where the federal government was embarrassed. The London Times had an article. Everybody was embarrassed. And then the federal government put pressure on the local restaurants to get rid of their segregation laws. And then they went to Virginia and Maryland and made them change the law legally, because Virginia and Maryland had a law that says you have a right to refuse people, which meant black people primarily, refuse people. So the diplomatic community came to the table and brought about change in Washington, D.C. And a few months later, my parents were invited to the fancy restaurant. And they said to me, who was in boarding school, "You need to come up here and go." And I went, and I couldn't believe it. My first time, a whole lot of glasses with the ambassador from Ghana. I was all up clean. I enjoyed it so much. So the diplomatic community has been a part of the racial progress in our country. And unfortunately, that history has not been explored because it's been relegated to American historians who look at the 60s rather than international historians that'll look at it in a global way.